You know every time we speak, it's no apologies. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory, presenting industry insiders, brought by Bill Murray. He help you in a real hurry. From ownership to healthcare, he an advocate, teaching you how to buy and sell practices. From CPAs to attorneys, all guests, here to help you with your goals. You never know who's on next. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory. Let's go!
Welcome, everybody, to the first ever recording of Industry Insiders with Wicklow Healthcare Advisory. I am your host, founder and CEO, Bill Murray of Wicklow Healthcare Advisory, and I am excited to start off this podcast introducing you, the healthcare practitioner, whether you're a dentist, a veterinarian, a medical doctor, into industry insiders, people that can help you with your business, people that can help you with whether you're planning on growing, expanding, or exiting your healthcare practice, whether you're an owner or a potential buyer of a healthcare practice, or you're an associate doctor. Wicklow Healthcare Advisory is bringing on the cream of the crop, people and businesses that we know can help you thrive as an owner. Today's guest needs somewhat of an introduction, not a complete introduction, because many of you probably know him if you're in the veterinary industry, but for those of you in dental and medical, you've probably heard of Bank of America, I would assume, but you may not know Chris Howard. So Chris, come on in. Welcome to Industry Insiders. Chris Howard is the National Sales Manager for Bank of America's Practice Solutions Division, focusing on the veterinary sector. So today will be a very veterinary-focused day. We'll spend 30 or 45 minutes getting to know Chris and what he and the team at Bank of America do for the veterinary industry. So Chris, welcome, man. It's great to have you on.
It's great to be here, Bill. I appreciate the invite, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
That's awesome. Chris and I go way back. Many of you who know the story of Wicklow Healthcare Advisory or have been to my site know that I spent a very long time, over 20 years, with Bank of America and predecessor companies. And Chris and I actually got to work together. So it's fitting that a very good friend, a very good industry partner is here as our first guest on Industry Insiders. So Chris, give us a little background. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about, how you got to Bank of America and what you've been doing in your career there at Practice Solutions.
Yeah, and again, thanks again for the invite, Bill. Great to be here. My road to where we're at today started back in 2012 when I took an opportunity to take an inside sales role, and didn't know what I was getting myself into. Just had some friends that worked at Practice Solutions, and they said you'd be good at this. So got married in the month of December of 2011. Made the hike to Columbus, Ohio in January 2012. So I'm on a handshake basis with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law to this day, for other reasons. That's because I took their daughter to Columbus, Ohio right after we got married. But it was an awesome experience.
Columbus, Ohio, the hotbed of
practice lending.
Columbus is like the hotbed of healthcare financing. Pretty
That's
amazing
right.
How many companies have people in the great city in Columbus and state of Ohio. So you're in Columbus, starting with practice. That's great. Inside sales, what were you doing?
Inside sales started off working with dentists on the West Coast, trying to support an outside sales team. Thought I was doing okay. Thought I was doing all right. It felt like it, at least, out of a class of around 20 people or so. And then all of a sudden they kind of pumped the brakes on that, and they said, hey, we want you to go do the animal health inside sales support for the East Coast. And I remember thinking to myself, I think I screwed up. I must have offended someone. I got to apologize, because I thought I was on the fast track, right? That was where I wanted to be. And then all of a sudden they kind of derailed that and kicked me over to animal health. And it couldn't have been done any differently. And I wouldn't change a thing, because it was the best thing that could ever happen in my career.
That's awesome. So you've been in the veterinary industry helping veterinarians from inside sales, and then I believe you were promoted to outside sales, and now you're the national sales manager for Bank of America's veterinary lending division. And that just happened recently, so a big congratulations to you on that new role. Can you walk us through your progression in the industry and how each particular path that you took, inside sales, outside sales, and now national sales, how you go about supporting the veterinary industry in each of those roles and why they were important to the veterinary clients you work with?
Absolutely. Each level has different responsibilities, but as a whole, the bank has focused for 27 years now on supporting the healthcare lending industry, right? And it's not just here's your loan, best of luck to you. We try to give you everything else besides that, and then thereafter support after the sale, so to speak. So when you first start off in that inside role, you're trying to make heads or tails about what you do on a daily basis. A lot of education goes into it to get people prepared and ready for what they're stepping them into. If you do well at that and you progress, we believe in hiring and promoting from within. And if you do well at it, we give opportunities, right? So found an opportunity to move down to the southeast and really learn the ropes under some really good people. Did that for about a year or so, and it was eye-opening. So doing that for that first year, understanding just what the landscape looks like, and being able to put faces with the names that you hear when you're inside that shop in Columbus, Ohio. That was dramatic and somewhat impactful, to say the least, because again, you're hearing these names, but then you see them in action, you see how they help support the veterinary community. That was eye-opening. From there, again, I think I made someone upset, and I found my way up to Chicago and started managing the Great Lakes and part of the Midwest. So at one point in time or another, I think I had 10 states that I had to travel and manage and try to help support our veterinarians in those states, in those territories. And over that time, I believe in doing right by people. I believe the industry itself, the doctors that become veterinarians, they focus their lives on trying to, help animals and in turn helping people. And at the end of the day, almost 99% of those folks in that business are really good people. And I feel like our team is a reflection of that. We have really good people that just want to help, right? So it's very like-minded on what we see. But yeah, and most recently, about 4 months ago. Yeah. No, go ahead.
You spend a lot of your time in outside sales, not only working with veterinarians directly, but also with all of the industry people around them, right? So talk about that relationship. You kind of have, it feels like at Bank of America, you have two separate clients. You've got the doctor who's like the primary client, the person you're trying to satisfy and win the business and provide them the right financing. But then you also have this other piece, which is all of the industry partners that surround the client as well. Can you talk about how that interactions work and how you go about to build that kind of universe list of people and how you went about that in outside sales?
Yeah, more than happy to do so. And this is, again, for someone that doesn't work in the industry, it's kind of eye-opening to see it and how it takes shape. So each city, each market has veterinary-specific or at least healthcare-specific resources that are familiar with building a practice from scratch or transitioning a practice, and everything in between, right, as a tenured ownership will experience. It's amazing to see the amount of level of focus that a contractor might have in animal health builds and architecture. The distribution companies that help support these practices, the pharmaceutical companies, just anyone and everyone from a line of business standpoint that helps make a project come off the ground and not have a dream turn into a nightmare. We've seen the people that don't have experience within animal health, and same for the dental counterparts and the physician landscape as well. If you're not familiar with how a dental or a veterinary build happens and you're a contractor, you don't want to cut your teeth on that first one because it turns that dream scenario into a nightmare. So I feel like we've done the homework over that 27-year timeline of really good, vetted out representatives of lines of business that can help bring that idea to fruition. And the same is true on the transition side with the acquisitions. You got practice brokers like yourself. You got attorneys, CPAs that are, some are not all created equal, right? You got to find the good people that can help out and really give back to a veterinarian to try to make things make sense. And I feel like there's a community of these professionals that all kind of know each other, right? And if they don't, we try to connect those dots and then ultimately benefit the client and give back to that client to where they have peace of mind and they know hindsight's not going to be 20/20 because they got the A team working for them.
That's great. So in outside sales, when you covered that Midwest region and had all those states, which when you say 10 states out loud, it sounds crazy. Now you have 50, so I'm sure it's even more overwhelming. But with those 10 states, like your day-to-day, you were working with veterinarians of every stage, right? So you would deal with first-time practice owners, existing owners, doing huge build-outs or big ground-up construction projects. So you were dealing with kind of everything. Like where does Bank of America fit in like the ecosystem of helping veterinarians in business? Like what, obviously, when you think of Bank of America, you think about money and checking accounts and loan. What is it that Bank of America does that's unique to the veterinary industry, and how do they help?
Yeah, great question. And kind of a loaded question because there's so many different facets of what we try to do on a daily basis, right? It starts with giving access to capital, right? And these veterinarians that are coming out of school, really before that, actually when they're in school, we're doing a lot of education through the VBMA programs, just giving back to the students, right? And getting them prepared for what it looks like after graduation. You know, life after graduation, been a presentation we delivered several times over throughout the United States at all these different veterinary schools. So you start there, right? And you get them out of school, get them into practice. They're usually associating, 2 to 3 years, and they'll get that itch to say, hey, let's start that practice. So I can tell you several stories, and there's one doctor that told me this years after she had bought her second practice through Bank of America Practice Solutions. I first met her in 2016. Her and her husband sat down with me at a Panera bread company and, said, hey, we want to start a practice. And at the time, they felt like, and they didn't share this at the time, but later on they told me the story. They felt like they were wasting my time and their own time. They didn't think this dream could become a reality. And, she credited me with a lot of, kudos, basically saying we couldn't have done this without you. And I said, no. You did all the heavy lifting. I just gave you the framework and the access to capital to be successful. And, she's 2 practices in. She started her first, extremely successful. She bought a second one, extremely successful, and she's looking to acquire a third and then relocate the first one. So we want to be that one-stop shop for any one of those needs as a practice owner. So getting into practice and then remodel, relocation, second locations, multiple locations, whatever it happens to be that you need capital for, we want to be the resource for that client. And we want to give them aggressive financing that gives them the safety net in case things don't come off as they would have hoped. We give them that security blanket to make sure that they have good cash flow. Otherwise, we're probably not putting them in that situation. So we believe in being very responsible on how we approach the industry and being good partners, not just for 1 or 2 or 3 years. We want to be here for the long haul.
Great. And it's funny, in my new role, having, obviously as a sell-side advisor, practice broker, making sure, private buyers have access to financing to fulfill this, especially those younger associates that come, they need guidance. They obviously need the money. In most cases, they don't have huge down payments available. So I know some of the programs that Bank of America provides, an associate can literally get into practice ownership with no money down. Is that still a big product? And if you look at, what the veterinary lending landscape looks like today, what seems to be like the most used product that you guys put out there for veterinarians?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we still have the 100% conventional financing for a doctor that's associating, then wants to start and hang their own shingle. So 100% financing for, any of those folks that have that need and that want and that desire. And again, the last thing we're going to give that doctor is the actual financing. We want to give them the platform, give them the resources, give them the A-team, so to speak, on how to take that dream, to reality and not turn it into a nightmare. So that's been prevalent really since, private equity entered into the space and really started kind of taking, I don't want to say taking over the acquisition side of the business, because that's receded and regressed. But it's still the startups, the associate that didn't, have the chance to maybe purchase their practice. It was sold out to a corporation. That created opportunity on the flip side of that coin. So we saw a ton of that over the past 4 to 5 years. Still true today. But I will tell you, the acquisition marketplace, and you would probably attest to it, has come back in a big way, just from the private equity purchasing. It's still going on, but we're seeing that flip of the script back to kind of a normal size market. So, and when we look at those acquisitions,
totally, it seems like there's been this kind of pendulum swing, right? So 5 years ago, associates were, 5 years ago, 4 years ago even, associates seemed very skeptical that there would be practices available for them to buy, because it felt like private equity was kind of taking over all of them. Private equity is certainly, their appetites change, and they change regularly. And I think there's a great path for corporate-owned practices. I also think there's a great path for private-owned practices. a healthy industry has a mix of both. But it does seem as though the private practice, single doctor, and these are great practices, million plus in revenue. They make the owner a really good living. They typically come in with real estate. Those practices seem to be more available in the private space to another veterinarian owner than there were before. Is that the pendulum swing that you're kind of mentioning there?
Correct. We're seeing that associate that's working at a 2 or 3 doctor practice that might be doing $1.2 million all the way up to $1.7 million, something like that. We're seeing that opportunity be given to that associate, right? And at a price point that makes sense for a private buyer. I think that's the biggest differentiator between that pendulum swing all the way over here a couple of years ago. They were outpriced, right? And you couldn't make sense for a family to support that debt and be a practice owner if they were going to purchase. So cause and effect, right? During that time frame, we saw all those startups taking place. Pendulum swings back a little bit more. Now we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in the startups and more gravitating towards the practice acquisition side of the business. So cause and effect.
In my business, it's funny. I just want to make sure that associates are even aware that there are ownership opportunities outside of startups available to them. I have a bunch of practices listed right now that would be phenomenal opportunities for associates in and around the East Coast, and that's probably been the biggest challenge, is trying to find associates that even have the awareness that there are practices available to purchase. So I know you guys have. I know you guys in the Bank of America team are always out there trying to educate and make sure that associates are aware of their ownership opportunities, which is great. Talk to me a little bit about, so now you're this national guy. You're the NSM, National Sales Manager for Bank of America. It's a big job, a big title. What is that? What do you do now? Like in your role today, talk to me about your team. Talk to me about what your day-to-day looks like in your new role, and how do you support the industry from your national sales role today?
Yeah, it's definitely a change, right? And it's been a challenge, right, taking on that new role. So today we have a team of about 12 business development officers that are spaced out throughout the United States strategically in markets that make sense to have someone based. And so I would tell you about 50% of the time I'm working with the team, trying to figure out ways to connect to the markets and be best partners of the industry and the resources that are servicing these veterinarians, and just at the end of the day trying to secure financing for practice, startups and acquisitions and everything in between. The other half of the time is spent, working with those different resources, right? Those centers of influence, and trying to be good partners to them and trying to connect everyone together to try to make it make sense. And then we try to put an emphasis on product enhancement. So kind of updating the wardrobe, so to speak, with the times. So, trying to take a deep dive into that, working with different, industry experts and asking what is needed in the marketplace, and then trying to deliver that product set, I should say. So every day is a little different, but it's fun, it's new, and it's a challenge, but exciting all at the same time.
That's great. I know, obviously, coming from Bank of America, I know the team really well, and I'll give you my shameless plug. I think you guys do a really good job financing veterinarians. When you like a deal, you typically win it. And I had a great career there, and I'm happy to see the team flourishing under your leadership, which is great. You did plug Panera Bread, so I'm going to reach out to Panera Bread right after this and call them to see if they'd like to be my first sponsor of the podcast.
There you go.
A lot of Panera Bread meetings over the last 12 years, I'm assuming, in outside sales, right? A lot of Panera Bread, a lot of industry events, trade shows. So you guys are you out there? Are you going to all the trade shows and events? And how does a client, if I'm a veterinarian listening today, like, how do I go and engage? Do I walk into a branch? Like, how do I engage with your team if I have a need or just want to start a conversation?
Yeah, fastest, easiest way to do it, bankofamerica.com/practice solutions, right? That's the website. So finding us via the internet is probably your easiest bet, but we're everywhere. We try to be, at least, right? So in your marketplaces, those different resources that you talk to, most likely we have a relationship, and they're people, if they're reputable, they know who we are too. So connecting to the local marketplaces, working with people like yourself, I know you can be a great conduit to try to marry people up in the right way. That's the whole purpose of why you do what you do. So Panera is actually St. Louis Bread Company originally, okay? And there's only like one or two locations left in the United States that are called St. Louis Bread Company. And it just so happens to ironically be in St. Louis, where I'm born and raised and currently live today. So we needed all the help we can get in St. Louis. We've been going through a little bit of a downturn the last couple of years, if anyone hasn't noticed. But we're hopeful it's going to go on the upswing sooner or later.
Leave it to Chris Howard for his shameless plug of St. Louis, Missouri. So or Missouri. Not sure how you guys say it.
Depending on what part of the state you're from. What part of the state you're from determines how you say it. So
that's right.
Yeah.
I learned that. I learned that depending on where I was traveling. That's right.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's really funny. So obviously, again, big national role. You are traveling the country. What are some of the things that you're seeing in your travels, just from a geographic standpoint? What's going on in California, the Northeast, the Southeast? Anything that you've noticed here recently, or trends that you're seeing in the industry, kind of nationwide?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so far, out of our 12 BDOs, I think I've traveled with 75% of them, right? So I've been out and about, seeing the West Coast, just started making my way over to the East Coast, and then down to Texas and whatnot in between. It feels like each market's unique. And I've worked the Great Lakes and the Midwest and the Southeast before this, so I've seen that in person. But each market calls for a little bit of a different product set. So some markets you might see there's no real good practices for sale right now. Some have all been flipped over to private equity groups, or the current ownership is standing pat, and there's really no opportunities out there that associates are interested in, or other doctors that are owners are looking to buy. So we're seeing those people say, hey, you know what? I'm going to start one from scratch. I'm going to do some demographic studies, some feasibility, or I'm going to talk to some industry professionals and find out where that sweet spot or where that pocket could be to go ahead and drop a new practice into. So I always tell people there's an art form to starting a practice. And there's a little bit of a science to it, right? Objective math and whatnot, but there's more of an art form to having a good startup if you know all the ways to get it done. And our team, I feel like, has a really good approach with that, so they can share that with you if you're interested. But then there's other markets that you're seeing the population, the demographic shift and move towards, and it's just nonstop startups, acquisitions. So you're seeing a lot of these markets in the Southeast. You're seeing it down in Texas. You're seeing it in Kansas City, of all places. You're seeing people relocate from Denver and Chicago, and they're moving to KC, and KC's kind of exploding. So, you're seeing different products being utilized in different parts of the country. In the Northeast, you're not really seeing a whole lot of ground-up construction because there's really not a whole lot of free land that people can get their hands on and build their own ground-up project. But if you go out to the Midwest,
Sure.
You're seeing people building like crazy, 3,000, 4,000, some cases, 15,000 square foot facilities from ground up. So it's been great to see. And if there was one good thing that came out of COVID, it was just the positive impact that it had on the animal health community and everyone that services it to it. So we're hoping to see that wave continue and not hit landfall for a long time. There are little headwinds in that marketplace, I feel like, with some of what we get to see kind of hitting landfall. But in general, it definitely seems like it's a strong industry that's, been called recessionary proof for a long time, and we don't see it slowing down anytime soon.
That's great. So you guys are still focused on veterinary long term. You're not seeing any real disruptions in your portfolio. I mean, even with some of the slowdown we've seen, I think the last couple of years it's kind of been overblown. People are still paying their loans. People are still building practices. People are still making investments. Is that a fair statement?
100%. 100%. This year, it's been a little bit slower, but I don't think it's because of the industry. I think it's more just as a global economy and just the election. This is my fourth presidential election, and not to be political, but they all kind of have a similar tone to them. The first half of the year is kind of slower, right? It seems slower, but now it seems to pick up right about now. So middle of the third quarter, end of the third quarter, all the way through the end of the year. And if history repeats itself, I think we'll see a decent amount of practice acquisitions that come out of the woodwork in the fourth quarter. And people weren't planning on it, but the opportunities present themselves, and all of a sudden it just, magic kind of happens at the end of the year. So that's historically what I've seen. I don't know if you would agree with that, or if you can offer any insight on your end.
Yeah, I mean, interest rates, I think, have really kind of slowed down some of the investment. I think people get scared off when you have interest rates as low as they were for so long. I mean, if you got a mortgage in 2019 like I did, I think my interest rate's a 30-year fixed sub 3%. It's free money at that point. And I think in business lending, so whether you were investing in equipment or you were investing in real estate or your hospital, you got really, really good interest rates. I mean, if you got a loan in 2020 or 2021, it was probably like 3%. I mean, it was crazy. But I think people got used to that and then got a little sticker shock when rates did increase, and they dramatically increased very quickly. And it just wasn't a normal economy. It was that kind of reaction to inflation, everything else going on. So I think there's been a little sticker shock, and I try to put this in perspective for my clients and for buyers of practices. If you're getting an interest rate of somewhere between 5.5% and 6.5%, like that's still a really great interest rate. 25 years ago, when I started financing healthcare practices, the rates were like 9.5% to 11%. So you're
Yep.
still half of where you were when I first started. And I want to date myself and make me sound any older than I already am. But when I think to like my parents' mortgages back in the day, they were paying 16 to 20%. So
That's right.
not that we'll ever get back to that, but I think we were very kind of spoiled with that sub 3%, 4% interest rate that was around for a few years, and now people just are getting comfortable with like, hey, I have to make this investment. I've put it off long enough. Interest rates have gotten a little bit better the second half of the year, and now they're starting to make those investments. I think you're seeing some of the same thing.
So to that point, I recently did a symposium on the dental side because I committed to do it before I took on this new role, and I wanted to follow through with that. I recently did that, and the room was predominantly mostly sellers, right? And I just asked a question. I said, "What do you guys think is the average interest rate right now, or where do you think banks are at right now that do this kind of lending, this practice financing?" And one person immediately said, 8.5%. I said, "Congratulations, that's the prime interest rate. You watch it just as well as I do." But most banks, can be tied to that. Not all are tied to it. So depending on who the lender is and how they access how they gain their capital from within, or if they have to borrow it from the government, all that kind of plays a factor in who you're working with and that cost of funds that gets passed forward to the client. So, we kind of did a guessing game for a while. I had some people throw out 10%. I had one person say, "Well, I got a 9.5% interest rate, so I'm hoping it's still around that mark." And I said, "You need to talk to us because we're not even close to that. We're not half of that, but we're pretty darn close to being half of that." So, I always think it's funny too, because you mentioned like the residential side, people that went out and bought houses back a couple of years ago, and they might be in the 2.5%, 3% range. If your residential mortgage drops, a quarter point, people are on that and trying to refinance that immediately. They don't want to let it slip past them. In practice lending, it's not uncommon to come across someone that has a 10.5% interest rate that you can bring down to 5.5%. And they just didn't know it was possible because they didn't understand there's different banks that have different focuses and different access to their own money that they can pay forward to the client. So I think that's where we can, really excel in trying to educate, but also giving that access to that aggressive capital to better someone's financial future. And then if they need more money to go out and start a new location or go out and acquire another location, we want to be that partner for them. And not just the lending side, right? That's a tip of the spear. It's all the additional products and services that the bank excels at and has best in class at, with merchant and credit card processing, the credit card spend, just getting points back on that. And then, it's something that, again, we would try to be a one-stop shop for anything professional and personal from a monetary standpoint for our clients.
Great. And I know you guys have a really great platform. So when you think about lending, I mean, the lending piece is always the first hurdle, and it feels like all of the other services are there. And I think that's, when you are choosing a partner, making sure that partner can service all of the aspects that you'll need from the financial aspect of your practice is a good idea. And I think you guys do a good job of that with your platform. So we're gonna wrap up with the last two questions. So if you've got one or two pieces of advice that you would give a veterinarian that is considering financing options for their project or a purchase, what are the things, give me one or 2 points that you'd like to give them so that they're a little more dangerous when they do talk to a bank about their financing options. What should they know?
Biggest thing is just don't ask what's the interest rate. That's what we're all trained to ask, and we're more than happy to answer it. I would ask what's the depth of the relationship look like, and what kind of strings attached come along with that interest rate. You get a chance to get this right for most people one time on the largest financial commitment you're ever going to make in your financial life. Talk to as many people as you feel like you need to. Get some different opinions, but get the best in class of who's been servicing that marketplace, and ask for how long that banker has been working at that branch or that location or within that group, because you'll find out it's very transient in healthcare lending, especially. And if you have a good rapport with someone, that person might not be there the next time you need that second bite of the apple for the next project or the next location you look to purchase. So I think longevity, asking the right questions about what makes a successful loan, what differentiates you in the marketplace. How long have you guys been doing it for? That's another testament to that approach of that bank. Are they going to be there for the long haul? Are they just going to come in, get an appetite for it for a couple of years, figure out it's not for them, and then they exit, and then you're stuck with maybe a different servicer of your loan? So, you have one chance to do this. Do the research and take the time it takes to get the right decision for your largest financial commitment in your entire life. That's the biggest thing. And I know there was one or two things you were looking for, and I gave you about 7, so I apologize for that. But it's a very comprehensive answer in terms of what I would do if my wife and I were looking at a practice loan, right? And I know, and I always tell my team, if you and your spouse or you and your family were looking to take out the largest financial commitment of your life, you know what to do. Your clients don't. Take that approach. Put yourself on that side of the table and treat them the way you want to be treated. And I think if you do that, and you have something good to offer, it's going to work out in your favor more times than not.
Great. I was with a client last week, and I had a similar conversation. It was about selling their practice, and it was what I told them. I actually told them not to sell. I said, listen, if you were my family member, I would tell you not to sell your practice right now. You're going to leave a lot of money on the table. You've got the run rate was going great. They just opened their second location. I think it was just the right thing to do. So it's a great point in if you and your family were going through this, these are the things that you would be focused on. A great point there. For those, as this is our first, podcast, many of our listeners may not be aware of what Wicklow Healthcare Advisory, where the Wicklow name comes from. So if you haven't been on the website to read through the story, Wicklow is a county in Ireland that I aspire in my life at some point to spend time or a good amount of time of my retirement in. I'd love to have a place there. I've been there many, many times. So when I was thinking about the name of the business when I created it, I wanted to make sure my focus was on the client and what I was doing to help our clients and what we were doing to make sure our clients were taken care of. And one of the things that I came to a realization was that I'm usually, in most cases, helping clients sell their businesses and start their retirement. So that retirement factor is there. Or maybe they're not ready retirement age yet, but they're selling anyway, and we're creating some type of generational wealth event for that family so that when they're ready for their retirement, they could start it, or maybe even start it a little earlier. So I named the company Wicklow Healthcare Advisory to have that retirement story in my head with every type of interaction I have with clients and vendors and people like yourself. So Wicklow is focused on helping those owners exit ownership on their terms and ensuring that they can enter into their retirement with the right nest egg, with the best value for the business that they sold. So with that being said, we'll end it here, Chris. What's your retirement story? What's your Wicklow? What do you got?
I love it, Bill. I love that about the name of your company, right? Because whenever I say it, I think about it for myself and my wife, Nikki, and our family. Ironically enough, it's Ireland as well, and it's Killarney. We had the chance to go visit in 2022, and her and I both agreed it was the best trip we've ever had in our entire life. And if anyone's never been to Ireland, you're missing the boat. You got to get over there, and you got to see how nice the people are. The landscape is beautiful. The food's actually pretty darn good too. I think I came back. I saw my electrophysiologist, cardiologist.
Not better.
And he told me, he's like, you've been enjoying some heavy dairy products, huh? And I said, well, we were just in Ireland, and everything is creamer and butter and everything else in between, fried fish, the fish and chips, and it was just incredible. It was my favorite trip I've ever had in my entire life, and I travel for a living, So it's got to be finding a place in Killarney, and that could change as we take more trips to Ireland because we're definitely going back. But yeah, that's
Sure.
that's my Wicklow. It's getting over to Ireland as well and finding a nice place.
I knew that's amazing. I knew that obviously I knew your family well, and I knew that you had that trip to Ireland. I did not know that was part of your Wicklow now, and that's great. So that was very fitting to have you on as our first guest and have that kind of Ireland connection, which is great. Well, listen, I couldn't be more happy to have you on today. I think our listeners and watchers were able to get some insight into what Bank of America and your team and you specifically do for the veterinary industry. We were happy to provide our listeners an insider that truly, I mean, you've been there for over a decade. You've been helping veterinarians in the Midwest and now nationally for years. And we just really appreciate what you and the Bank of America team does in the veterinary industry and for veterinarians in the healthcare practice field. So thank you so much for being on, Chris. With that, if you want to reach out to Chris or his team, www.bankofamerica.com/practice solutions. Chris's email address will be on the board here at the end as well. So if you want to reach out to Chris direct to get connected to one of his team members, you're more than welcome to reach out. And then certainly if you're a practice owner or a potential buyer of practices, reach out to Wicklow Healthcare Advisory at www.getwicklow.com or reach out to me. My email address is up there as well directly. Happy to have a conversation and happy to continue introducing you to some of the best insiders in our industry today. So again, thanks, Chris, for coming on, and have a great rest of your week. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Had a great time.
You know, every time we speak, it's no apologies. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory, presenting industry insiders, brought by Bill Murray. He help you in a real hurry. From ownership to healthcare, he an advocate, teaching you how to buy and sell practices. From CPAs to attorneys, all guests, here to help you with your goals. You never know who's on next. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory.